Hi, I'm Dr. Peter Osborne, founder of Gluten-Free Society, and I'm here in the manufacturing plant where all my products are made. I wanted to give you a behind-the-scenes tour to show you how we make my products so you can be as confident as I am that they are safe, powerful, and effective. In step one, when a raw material ingredient arrives at the facility, we first need to make sure it really is what our supplier says it is. For instance, if we ordered magnesium, we test to verify that that's what they shipped. Then we further test to ensure it has zero issues with harmful bacteria or heavy metal levels. Why do we do this? I want proof from the start that you're getting clean, safe ingredients. This step exceeds industry standards, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Then comes step two. Once all the raw materials pass this first step of quality control, they're weighed individually so the right ingredients and the right amounts end up in your supplements. They're blended in specialized machinery to make sure you get the same product each and every time. During step three, the product is packaged and goes to the lab for its final round of testing. In this stage, we confirm that what's on the label is in the product and retest to ensure nothing unexpected has snuck in. Testing before, during, and after might seem redundant to you, but we want to be absolutely certain you can trust these products. By the way, if you get your supplements somewhere else, there's a chance they may not have been tested at all. I use these products in my clinic, I use them myself, I use them with my friends and family and loved ones, and most importantly, I share them with you, knowing you'll see powerful results in your own health. And as always, we want to make sure you have access to high quality, gluten-free products so that when you're looking for supplements to take, you don't have to worry about cross-contamination issues that could make you sick.
You unlock this door with the key of compassion. Beyond it is another world, a world of science, a world of common sense, a world of sanity. You're moving into a land of both empathy and ethics, of nutritional knowledge and empowerment. You've just crossed over into Dr. Osborne's zone.
Hey everybody, welcome to Dr. Osborne's Zone. Tonight is part 4 in a three-part series. It's a fourth part tonight, but the last several weeks we've been talking about how the system has failed us, specifically the medical system. And so we've gone into those of you that struggle with chronic inflammatory diseases, things like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, how the system has completely and utterly failed you. We've got more than 50 years of modern medicine at this point, actually closer to 60 years of modern medicine. And we spent $4 trillion last year in healthcare, and we're ranked 17th overall in industrialized countries for the treatment of chronic degenerative diseases. So we spend $4 trillion a year, and the outcome of that expense is not less disease and not healthier Americans. And this is true if you live in America. This is also true if you live in other industrialized countries where pharmacy dominates every decision that your doctors, medical schools, and public healthcare systems are making, where pharmacy has undue influence. And so, we have this track record of diseases not going away, diseases not really getting better, but more and more people struggling with polypharmacy. And ultimately, this system has failed us because we spend money. Think about it, it's the only business, one of the only businesses in the world, and medicine is a business, make no mistake about it, that the customer spends money, and if the results are poor, bad, negligent, there is no refund. And there is no expectation of refund. There's just, sorry, we don't know enough, it just didn't work for you. And that's not acceptable, that's not okay. We have to hold medicine, we have to hold doctors and hospitals to a much higher level of accountability, because we know, if you paid attention to these last 3 episodes, you now know, maybe you didn't before, but you should know. And if you haven't watched them, go back and watch them. We know what causes chronic degenerative disease. And that's what I spent the last 4 or so hours spelling out for you in a very easy format, easy to understand. So again, if you haven't watched that, I can't emphasize enough, go back and watch the replay of those episodes. I don't know if we can put some links down below to any of those replays. But do yourself the favor, especially if you're struggling and you're fed up. So the system has failed us. So tonight we're going to take questions about that, specifically what questions you have whatever it is, it's a free-for-all, so feel free to ask me any question that you have. I'd also like to give a shout out before we dive into the night show to my son, Dr. Anthony Osborne, who just got married here this last week, and that's been a great thing for our family and our family. And so I'd like to just tell him congratulations live, and hopefully maybe some of you guys can chime in and tell him congratulations. So we're happy and excited that we have a new addition to the family. Okay, let's dive into your questions. What can you tell me about alpha-lipoic acid? I've been told it can reduce inflammation. Yeah, alpha-lipoic acid can. It's like a B vitamin, although technically it's not a B vitamin. And what it's really known for is helping to regenerate glutathione and helping to reduce neurological inflammation. So a lot of research studies on diabetic neuropathy show that high doses of alpha-lipoic acid can actually, in many cases, improve and in some cases reverse diabetic neuropathies. And so, I don't know what specifically you want to know about alpha-lipoic acid, but if you want to know more in-depth information, I did an entire show on it. We maybe can put a link below. We have a crash course on that particular topic. Okay, let's see, go up on the right for me. When I was in Portugal, Susan asked, when I was in Portugal, I could eat baked goods without any problem. What's the difference between our wheat and theirs? Lots of differences. One of the biggest differences in European, and this isn't true of all European countries, but it is true of countries like Italy. To my knowledge, at this point anyway, this could change, but Italy and Portugal are examples of countries that they do not double spray their wheat with glyphosate. That's one of the differences. And so the pesticide difference. One of the other differences is the bromination of flour. In the US, a lot of the baked goods are chemically brominated, so they add bromine. If you've ever looked at a bag of white flour and it says brominated flour, that's bromine. And bromine is a halogen that interferes with thyroid hormone function. Bromine displaces iodine from the thyroid, and so it can create problems in that way. So European grains, typically processed grains, are not brominated the way we do that in the US. Some of the other big differences, there are a lot of them. One of them is when people go on vacation, and I see this a lot because I've seen it work in a couple different ways. I've seen people go on vacation, and when they stay for lengthy periods, they initially feel better, and then they start feeling worse again the longer they're gone. One of the things that happens if you're on vacation is an endorphin high. And so people generally, when they get out of their stress of their normal day-to-day life, they feel better. There's more of an endorphin release, and so whatever ails you is feeling better, not necessarily because you're eating something different than what's in the US, but because of the situation environmentally. It's just more and conducive to relaxation and less stress. But I'd say the two biggest chemical differences in the grain are the bromination process, and then next to that, it's the pesticide addition, the heavy pesticide spray. But gluten content is not different. And so if you're truly, this is why I always encourage people to test for gluten sensitivity as opposed to speculate, because if you're not gluten sensitive, you might be able to tolerate some of those types of grains and do okay. But if you are, it doesn't matter what country of the world that you're in, I wouldn't encourage you to eat grains if you're gluten sensitive. Again, the difference being if you know whether or not you are. Let's see here. Wondering what you'd recommend for dermatitis or seborrheic dermatitis when all else has failed. Number one thing that you should do if you've got seborrheic dermatitis is change your diet. I've seen it countless times where people change their diet, go grain-free, dairy-free, sugar-free. Those three things can be an invaluable diet change for dermatitis. And so if you haven't done that yet, do that first. Now, if you've already done that and you're still struggling, and you've got to get tested. One of the things you should be tested for is other food sensitivities, because more than one food can play a role in the production of seborrheic dermatitis. So, you may be reacting to other foods beyond grain, dairy, and sugar that could be playing a role in that. So get tested. If your doctor won't test you, check out our direct-to-consumer test at Gluten-Free Society. We can put a link up for you, Victoria, on that as well. Get tested. The second thing to get tested for is your vitamin and mineral status. There are certain nutrient deficiencies that can cause seborrheic dermatitis. Probably biotin is the most common one. Biotin deficiency can contribute to it. So if you haven't tried supplemental biotin, it's something you could try. It's relatively inexpensive to do. It's harmless. It won't hurt you to do it, and it might help you. But ultimately, you want to get tested, because if you get tested, you won't have to guess. Is there a test to tell if a person has too much oxalates? Yes. And so one of the best test measurements for that is urine output. And there are different kinds of urine tests for oxalate, and the one I would recommend that any doctor can run, you can go to a general practitioner and have it done, is what's called a 24-hour oxalate test. And it's where you do a urine collection for 24 hours and then send that off, and you'll get back a reading on whether or not you have high levels of oxalates. So that's one of the best ways to know. But even that test, sometimes a person will have a negative result and still feel better eating a low oxalate diet. And there's a reason why I see that happen sometimes, and that's because that individual might have a yeast imbalance or yeast overgrowth. If you have a yeast imbalance or overgrowth internally, yeast have a chemical pathway whereby they can produce oxalates inside of you. And so sometimes people hit an oxalate limit because they've got yeast producing it, they're eating high oxalate foods. And so know that those are two types of tests. You can get tested for oxalates directly, but you can also ask your doctor to test you for yeast overgrowth. Generally speaking, depending on what other symptoms you could have, if your symptoms are gastrointestinal oriented, a stool microbiome type test for yeast overgrowth would be, and a microscopic analysis would be a good place to start, or a good place to ask your doctor to start. What's a good deodorant that won't poison us? There are a number of different ones. Native is a company that produces an all-natural deodorant. I don't use them. I'm trying to remember the name of the deodorant I use, Mary Ellen. What I'll have to do is come back on another show and do a video, and we'll do a deodorant review. And that way I can put a few different options out in front of you, because off the top of my head, I can't recall the names. Let's see here. Mary says, I want to ask Dr. Osborne what he thinks about biological impedance. So biological impedance is a measurement. It's a type of scale that uses electrical current to measure body fat. And I think they're a good tool, Mary. I think the issue that people can run into with using a BIA, a biological impedance analysis, is that you use different machines. So if you have your own and you use that machine consistently day in and day out, or that's the way to do it. But you wouldn't want to use your machine and then, say, go to the gym where they're using their machine and then try to compare the two, because different machines are going to give you various results. And so you just, again, the technology is pretty good. It's not 100% accurate. It's not as accurate as, say, getting in a water pod and doing underwater weight, which is not a practical thing to have in your bathroom as a scale device. It's something you go to a university research department and they could do, but most people don't have one of those in their garage or in their bathroom. So BIA scales are good to help you keep tabs on your muscle mass. A lot of them you have to be careful when you do it, because the metric can change. So if you do it immediately after a workout, you might get a higher muscle mass reading than if you did it before your workout. So whatever you do when you use these machines, you do it at the same time with the same habit and the same pattern, because otherwise you'll get a plus or minus 3% variance on your body fat. It could be construed as either a detriment or a benefit, depending on which way it goes. Blood test showed low platelets. What does it mean, and how can I correct it? Linda wants to know about low platelets on her blood test. So low blood platelets can be caused by a lot of different things. Certainly in my experience, I've seen gluten cause low platelet counts. Vitamin B12 deficiency can cause low platelet counts. Folate deficiency can cause low platelet counts. So it could be a nutritional deficiency, could be a food sensitivity or a food allergy. Those are probably two of the most common causes of low platelets. A lot of doctors want to give you a complicated diagnosis, like thrombocytopenia purpura, which is an autoimmune condition where they don't have a reason that they could tell you. But I have seen cases where that type of autoimmune low platelet diagnosis was resolved as a result of diet change. So I'm going to say more on the side of diet change in vitamins and minerals. So get those things tested. Test your foods, test for nutrient deficits. Do you recommend a protocol for a head cold? This one's hanging on longer than usual. I do have one, Ruthie, and it's on Gluten-Free Society. I think we posted that. See if we can find our cold and flu nutrition support protocol, because it's a pretty in-depth one, and if you've got something you're really struggling to overcome, this is what I would recommend. It's a heavy hitter. But just one thing is NAC, N-acetylcysteine, at higher doses, 2 to 3 grams, especially if you've got a lot of sinus congestion and mucus congestion not leaving the head. Dennis says, I take 3 grams of DHA and 1 gram of EPA. I'm assuming you mean a day. Is that a good dose for brain health? I'd say get your levels tested, Dennis. You can ask your doctor. I mean, this is a basic blood test, and most doctors can run it, and insurance could possibly cover it for you, but it's called an omega check. And what it does is it measures the percentage of EPA, DHA, total omega-3, total omega-6 in your blood so that you can get a better idea of whether or not you're hitting the right metrics. And so as a general guide, your omega-3 percentage on a test like this should be somewhere between 8 and 12%, where your DHA in your blood by percent should be somewhere 4.5 or higher, and your EPA should be somewhere around 2.5 or higher. So those are kind of the metrics that you want to look for if you have your doc run that test. My sister-in-law has hyperthyroidism after giving birth due to medication. Did a genetic test. She's gluten sensitive, is on the diet. Does she need medication for her thyroid as well? Hard to say whether or not she needs it. If you're talking about hyperthyroid, there are certain medications that suppress thyroid function that are used. And the problem with those medications long term is they have other untoward side effects that you don't necessarily want. But the problem with hyperthyroidism, if it's unchecked, is it will put too much pressure on your heart and can end up increasing the risk for heart failure. So it's a balance. So in this situation, you really want to work with your sister-in-law wants to work with her doctor and have that monitored. And so there's some things that can be monitored. As she changes her diet, one of the things that we oftentimes will see in people that have hyperthyroid issues is their hyperthyroid lab tests will start to improve. And when that happens, that's the cue in for your sister-in-law to then go have a conversation with her doctor about potentially, maybe starting with a medication reduction first. Again, that's a conversation she would need to have with her doctor. But it is possible to get off. I've had a number of people with Graves' disease be able to get off their medications as a result of diet change, particularly a gluten-free diet. Let's see, let's scroll down. What are some tests, blood tests, that can detect liver problems that don't show on a liver panel? Doctor keeps telling me my fatty liver isn't an issue, even though it hurts bad. Wow. I don't know. I would say if you know you have fatty liver, it's probably because you've had an ultrasound that physically showed fatty liver or some other type of image. And if your doctor's trying to blow it off, it's time to find a different doctor. That to me is not good advice. So other blood tests that you can, so there's ALT, AST, which are part of the standard liver panel, and then there's something called bilirubin, and you can have it checked. There's total bilirubin, then there's direct and indirect bilirubin that you can have checked. And then there's also ferritin. Ferritin is an acute phase protein that generally is elevated in people that have chronic liver inflammation. And so that might be helpful for you to assess as well. And then there's also another compound that typically they run, but if they haven't, it's called alkaline phosphatase. And elevations in alkaline phosphatase can also indicate that the liver's struggling. C-reactive protein is another test that you can have measured. But at the end of the day, if you've got direct imaging that shows fatty liver, you got to figure out why. And there are a number of reasons why. If you don't drink alcohol, and most doctors will blame alcohol. As a matter of fact, I had one woman one time, she had such severe fatty liver disease, and she was she didn't drink alcohol at all, but her doctors called her a liar, like they wanted to refer her to psych. And in her case, she had such a severe yeast overgrowth intestinally, like in her intestine. And yeast are fermenters, right? So people that have high levels of yeast overgrowth or imbalances of yeast, and then their heavy carbohydrate diets, what yeast in your gut will do is they'll basically ferment the carbohydrates that you eat and turn it and convert it into alcohol. And you may not be drinking, but again, a yeast overgrowth and a high carbohydrate diet combo can cause fatty liver disease. And so that could be a situation where if you don't test for yeast, you don't know whether or not that's happening. Again, that's a possibility. There are other possibilities. Gluten can cause fatty liver as well. If any of those of you who are watching the Jonathan Landsman's fatty or liver documentary, right, it's going on, I think, right now. I did maybe 3 or 4 hours of interview in that, and we talked in depth about gluten and fatty liver and autoimmune hepatitis. So you might want to go check that out too. I also have a show on the liver that you can check out in our archives. So maybe we can put a link down below for you. Let's see here. Do you encourage alcohol consumption? No, not generally. It's like, my shirt maybe contradicts what I'm saying right now because my shirt says thankful that rum and tequila are gluten-free. But I don't encourage alcohol consumption. That doesn't mean I encourage alcohol abstinence in 100% fashion. I think alcohol has a place in society. I think people tend to want to abuse it and oftentimes do, but I don't think that alcohol in and of itself is a great evil. But if you're trying to overcome illness and you're struggling with chronic inflammation, I think alcohol is a bad idea. But no, I don't encourage consumption by any stretch. I really miss my Warrior bread. When will the next batch be in? Yeah, we've been struggling, like many other manufacturers with the supply chain, and so we're expecting to have it in. I'm being told April, which I didn't like that message. I didn't like to hear that it would be so long, but that's what I'm being told. So if it comes in faster, we'll certainly let you know faster. Cadmium and lead in chocolate, is there any heavy metal-free option? Not that's really been tested. And I wouldn't go so far as to fear eating chocolate. I think where people get in trouble with the cadmium and lead content of chocolate is when they eat it in mass, not in mass like church, but in mass as in too much, or they eat it as a staple in their diet every day, and so they're being exposed to low levels that build over time. But there's heavy metals in a lot of food that we eat, even beyond chocolate. I mean, rice is an example of that too, although I don't encourage rice because of the gluten content. But again, I would just say conservative use would be the rule of the day. I'm currently following the no-grain diet and having a hard time differentiating between grain versus lentils versus pulses. So are black, green, and red gram considered grains? I think it depends on what you mean by gram. I think in some cultures, gram is actually a form of lentil. So barring seeing an image of what you're referring to, it's hard for me to know, because there may be a culture barrier that you're using the term gram in a different way. But to my knowledge, I believe gram is more of a type of lentil or pulse versus an actual grain itself. My niece is 10 months, had allergic reaction to milk. We went for allergic formula, or did a genetic test at 7 months, is gluten sensitive, got her out of rice and wheat flour. What to do with milk? Okay, so if your niece is 10 months old and has an allergic reaction to milk, is that milk from mother, or is that formula-based products with milk? I'm not sure what you mean by your question. But the number one best way to feed an infant is breastfeeding, hands down. Now, not all mothers are able to produce enough milk, and some have health issues where again, they can't get the milk production up enough to feed the baby. And sometimes babies react to mother's milk not because they're allergic to milk, but because they're allergic to mother's diet, and so the mom has to change her diet in order for baby to tolerate the milk. And that's probably a 2-hour-long conversation. But most of the formulas that are produced, even the non-allergenic formulas, are GMO soy and corn. And in my opinion, I wouldn't let that anywhere near my toddler. What I would do as an alternative, potentially go check out the Weston Price Foundation. And they have some formula recipes for natural formulas that you can make at home that, in my opinion, are a far better alternative to any of the over-the-counter products that you can buy. Even today, there's some organic ones that are coming out, but they're loaded with sugar, and you don't want to give an infant a product that has sugar as a primary ingredient. You're setting them up for failure and diabetes. Do you still recommend proper food combining? I don't know what you mean by proper food combining, but it's not that I recommend food combining or not food combining, Julian. What I recommend is that people are aware that when combining certain foods, if they feel bad, they might try eating them in single format to get a better idea of what's creating their problem. Some people don't do well when they combine, for example, heavy amounts of fruit with heavy amounts of meat. But that's not true as a generalization across the board. I would say food combining is an overrated strategy to try to solve a person's issue. Oh, I like this. Mary says, I used to have psoriasis, but I don't anymore. It took a year, but it's gone. Other skin rashes are likely the same. And that's my experience as well. It can take time with diet change to resolve rashes, but if you're hitting all the right notes, they can go away with diet change. Again, if diet's playing that role. Okay, see here. Hello, Doc. I've seen claims of cholesterol above 200 being good for longevity. Is there any benefit in trying to raise textbook optimal cholesterol above my 181? Not really. I think what we can say about cholesterol being higher is that there's empirical data in the research that shows that people with higher levels of LDL cholesterol actually can have longer lifespans. And that's not true of everyone. It's a generalization, but it's an observation. And so I don't know that means that everybody needs to go and try to raise their cholesterol either. I think the real message with cholesterol is quit worrying about it. Cholesterol, in my opinion, is a fabrication of a corporate giant entity that wants to sell you drugs to lower it. And when I first started practice 21 years ago, normal cholesterol was 280, and then they dropped it to 250, and then they dropped it to 220, and then they dropped it to 200, and now they're looking at dropping it further, and they're double downing. They want to put kids as young as 8 years old on statins. I mean, you imagine that? It's terrible advice. But that's what happens when you have the fox in the proverbial henhouse. When we look at who was responsible for lowering it from 280 to 250 to 220, et cetera, and you look at the conflict of interest amongst those panels of doctors, the conflict of interest was horrendous. And it's not even me that says that. I mean, the USA Today, I think it was when they took it from 250 to 220, wrote a scathing piece on the conflict of interest in medicine and how the FDA grants waivers to doctors who are being paid by pharmaceutical companies to make these decisions, which again, you know, the last person in the world you want to be able to make the decision about what everyone should do is somebody who's being paid by the very companies that stand the most to benefit. And so, you know, you have to look at all that cholesterol data with a huge grain of salt. And even more importantly, you have to look at the empirical outcomes of lowering cholesterol since the 1980s, which is about how long we've been doing it with statins. Do we have less heart disease? Do we have less strokes? Do we have less heart attacks? And the answer is no, we have more. And even if you adjust for the increase in population, we still have more. So empirically, what that tells us is that lowering cholesterol through pharmaceuticals don't really reduce death rates or mortality rates. And you know, cardiologists can argue all they want. They can get mad at people all they want for not wanting to take statins. But the reality is they don't have the evidence to prove that statins reduce mortality. Let's see here. Do you encourage people to make a commitment to a personal dietary requirement? Well, Julian, let me see if I understand your question. So I encourage people to commit to a personal dietary requirement. Clinically speaking, you know, when I deal with clientele one-on-one, we test them. And so when we have a test result that says this person reacts to gluten or dairy or blueberries or blackberries or whatever it might be, then I absolutely encourage them to commit to that diet change, because the whole point of doing testing is to basically to identify what a person should commit to. Because one of the hardest parts about committing to diet change is that gray area of uncertainty. You know, most people know sugar's unhealthy. Most people know, you know, soda and candy bars aren't good for you, but they still eat them, right? They still commit to eating them. They still commit to not eating them. And so when you have a black and white, and you know, from the immune system, from your own immune system directly saying, hey, you shouldn't do these things if you want to be healthy, to me, that's a much easier commitment because it is a black and white, as opposed to, I know I shouldn't eat it, but today's a special day and I'm going to go ahead and eat it anyway, because that's what a lot of people tell themselves. And then what ends up happening over the course of a year is, you know, count the holidays, count the birthdays, count the special occasions, count the parties, and before you know it, you know, a third or more of your entire year is addled with the permission to eat poorly, right? So when you think about that in terms of mathematical equation, if you eat bad a third of the time, your grade is a 66, which, you know, most schools would call that a bad grade. And I would say if your nutrition grade is a 66, you're probably not in great health, as a general rule of thumb. So yeah, I definitely encourage people to commit to personalized dietary protocols based on objective laboratory analysis versus generic dietary changes. Now, that being said, you should always pay attention and commit to eating foods that that are good for you. And so what does that really mean? Well, part of knowing that is listening to your body. If, you know, I see this all the time with patients, in that some doctor somewhere told that patient at some point in their life they should eat a particular food because it's good for them, and they eat that food despite the fact every time they eat it they feel horrible, but they keep eating it anyway. Like, that's, you know, and where we see that a lot is whole grains. The doctors say, eat your whole grains. You need 3 to 5 servings of whole grains a day to make sure that you get enough fiber and that you're healthy. And what happens is a lot of these people with gluten sensitivity, their health, are riddled with autoimmune disease and they hurt, and it's terrible advice, and they keep doing it anyway because they want to listen to their doctor. Never outsource the decisions about your health to your doctor explicitly, right? I mean, it should be a conversation with the doctor, not necessarily a dictatorship where the doctor says you have to do this or you have to do that, because the feedback from the patient matters. If a patient says, hey, every time I eat oatmeal, I have diarrhea and blood in my stool, and the doctor says, well, yeah, but oatmeal is good for you, that's bad doctoring. And that's bad self-advocacy. A patient should advocate for themselves as well, and don't just rely on the doctor's generalized advice to move forward. Okay, let's see here. My son is having seizures, did the genetic testing, and he is gluten sensitive. what is the next test that he should do? I think the next test, well, if he's having seizures, there are a lot of different kinds of tests that you might want to look at, because a lot of people that have seizures have B vitamin deficiencies. B vitamin, like B12 and folate, vitamin B1, those deficiencies can be triggers for seizures as well. Other food allergies or food sensitivities can also be contributing factors in seizure issues. So those would be two very simple tests that could be performed. Nutritional analysis combined with food sensitivity testing would be good places to start. But the best place to start is if the genetic test came back as gluten sensitive, then the diet change is the best place to start. And if the seizures subside and start to go away, you have a winner. And remember this too, Delaney, that many of the, I don't know if your son is on seizure medication, but many of the seizure medications actually cause B vitamin deficiency. Therein lies the crux of part of the problem, is that the very medicine that's being used to control the seizure can induce the seizure by causing B vitamin deficiencies. And that doesn't happen overnight. That generally takes, 6+ months for the medication to really deplete the nutrient, the B vitamins. But be aware of that, because again, if your son's on medicine, you just, again, your doctor, his doctor should be monitoring, B vitamin levels for sure. So Melanie asked, do you recommend avoiding typhoid and yellow fever jabs, traveling to rural Guatemala, have autoimmune, and avoid vaccines normally? That's a tough one. I mean, I'm not a fan of either, because, those are both things that can be treated should you pick them up. But if you're struggling with autoimmunity, you might just reconsider traveling to rural Guatemala as a choice. I mean, I can't tell you what to do there, but I can tell you what I would do, and that is no needle goes in this body. As a matter of fact, I have it right here. Let's see. A good book. This is for all of you. One of my favorites is this one right here. It's called Dissolving Illusions, and it's a thick read. It's a heavy read, but in my opinion, if you're trying to understand the issue around whether you should get a needle or not, that's a really good place to start, is reading that book, where you can fully understand the history of how these things were created, and how they're produced and how they're made and the side effects that they come with. And it's a non-biased history written by a nephrologist who saw so much kidney failure in her own patients that she could no longer ignore the issue of needles causing illnesses. So I would encourage you to read that and reconsider your decisions. Let's see. Years ago, I saw a presentation by a vet where a dog lost its hip bone via cancer. Using natural methods, the bone grew back. I've read if there are blood cells in the bone that they can grow back. So I don't know what you saw and what kind of presentation you saw, but the blood cells in the bone are what are called hematopoietic stem cells, and they represent cells that help form white blood cells, red blood cells, and platelets. And some of your white blood cells will morph into osteoblasts, which are a specialized immune cell that builds bone. But, I can't speak for the story that or the presentation that you saw, or its validity, or the nature of the type of cancer, or the nature of the aggressive loss of the bone, or not an aggressive loss of bone, but generally speaking, if it was some minor osteopenia in the hip bone that was able to regrow, that can be done very simply with natural methods. But if you had a major cancer eating through bone, I highly doubt that any natural methods allowed for a complete restructuring of that bone. That's just would be my opinion based on my own experiences. How do you know if you have a lack of intrinsic factor? There's not a great test that really helps to determine that. I mean, one of the better tests to know whether or not you have a problem with intrinsic factor is to measure whether or not you have intrinsic factor antibodies. But I haven't seen a great test. I mean, you can get it measured, but I haven't seen a great test that's consistently accurate. Should a doctor listen when we say we decline pharmacy medication due to too many side effects? Yeah, I think a doctor should listen. A doctor may have a different opinion and may want to give you that opinion. And I think it's important. That's why it's a doctor-patient relationship. Relationship being the key word. There's a conversation, not a dictatorship. It's not a doctor-patient dictatorship. It's a relationship. So if a patient's uncomfortable with a medication, the doctor can mount his or her case about why the patient might need that medication. But the doctor should listen and respect the wishes of the patient. Look at what's happened in the past 3 years. I mean, you want to talk about an invasion of privacy and intimacy at the ultimate spiritual level. Look at the mass mandates. No doctor had a right, no country, no state, no city, no entity had a right to demand that everybody take something that was untested, unproven, and they can talk about how it was tested and it was proven. No, it wasn't. We're seeing that play out now in a very big way, unfortunately, for those people that have done it. And, to me, that's a doctor-patient relationship is a consultant relationship. That's why when a patient sees one doctor and doesn't like their opinion, they can go get a second opinion. And I think when we get into the dictatorship notion that doctors have the sole authority to dictate what's best for the patient, I think we end up in trouble. I think we end up in a regime much like what happened in Nazi Germany, where doctors were doing experiments and practicing euthanasia on mentally challenged people and elderly people and children. Doctors had the right to say what the treatment was, and the patient didn't have a right to reject the treatment. I think that's a very dangerous place to go. I mean, look at medicine, $4 trillion a year, and we have the worst healthcare system in the world as it relates to disease and illness. And the health report card of our country sucks, frankly. So you need to have a doctor that will listen to you, because if you don't really have a doctor. You have a technician who's telling you what to do, but not really helping you understand why you need to do it, or understand what other kind of alternatives that may also be effective and helpful. What is good for pain all over, aching in the body, and what is fibromyalgia? So, Tony, a good place to start is No Grain, No Pain. Read it, follow it. If you've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, outside of following No Grain, No Pain, ask your doctor to check you for mold toxicity and mycotoxicosis. It's a very, very common theme in patients with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, and so it would be worthwhile investigating. Do DEXA scans really help? I'm 73, wondering why comparing my bones to 30, it's actually a 35-year-old, has any meaning. It doesn't. DEXA scans, this is just my humble opinion. Take it for what you will. DEXA scans are a profit model. That's about it. It really is no great validity to the information within a DEXA scan. If you want to run X-ray through your bone to assess bone, in my opinion, a better way to go about doing that is an X-ray, because you can see trabecular patterns and thinning of the cortex around bones. You can see so much more with an actual radiographic image of bone than you can. There's no real great image to look at in a DEXA scan. It's just a standard deviation bell curve number based on the bone density of 35-year-olds and comparing that to you. And so there's limited data. There are also urine tests that can be done that can help you understand your bone more effectively. So there's tests like deoxypyridinoline, which is a turnover marker of bone breakdown, and so high levels of that coming out in your urine could be significant for more aggressive bone loss. And those types of tests can be done safely, and like a urine test can be done every quarter, every 3 to 4 months, that can kind of help you understand whether your nutrition or diet changes are affecting your bone turnover. Bone scans, DEXA scans, can only accurately be done about once every 2 years. Well, 2 years is a pretty long window to assess whether or not something is working, especially if it's not working and then you lose the time. So, but DEXA scans, in my opinion, have very little benefit. It's just the standard of care. And so a lot of OB-GYNs and a lot of GPs they put it on the list of things that women should do, especially any woman over the age of 50 should do as a standard care, part of standard care and analysis. But I find that they have little value or benefit. Barbara's asking, do I believe that molecular hydrogen-infused water has curative benefits? Possibly. The problem with that type of product is there's really no great research. There's anecdote. There's tons of anecdote, tons of people reporting benefit. But generally when I recommend something on a large scale to a lot of people, there has to be more serious research than what we see with hydrogen-infused water. And maybe that research exists and I haven't read it. I don't want to claim that I've read all the research, but it's just generally not something that's in the repertoire of what I recommend as a priority for people to do. What causes boils? A lot of times infection on the skin, and then the skin responds by kind of encapsulating, and that is one way boils are created. I've seen gluten cause boils. I've seen people with chronic boil issues, I've seen those resolve when they change their diet. Brittle nails, what nutrient could be missing? Zinc, selenium, biotin, calcium, magnesium, strontium, to name a few. What do I think about coffee enemas? I think if you've got pancreatic cancer, they're a fantastic tool. I think in other cancers as well, but I think as a general rule of thumb, do healthy people need to perform coffee enemas? No, I'm not a fan of healthy people doing that on a regular basis. Brand of Birchwood xylitol. Yeah, I was talking about Birchwood xylitol the other day, and I want to say it's Health Garden, Denise. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's the right brand. Okay.
That's the bottom of Facebook for now.
Let's see. Deborah says, I'm enveloped in your book, No Grain, No Pain. I'm a celiac. I'm only 63. I'm in pain and having difficulty with my joints and hips. So Deborah, come back and let us know if you're enveloped in the book and you're applying it. I see a lot of people with refractory celiac problems do extremely well with no grain. Cutting out the corn, the rice, and the other grain substitute processed food products do tremendously better. So let me know how it works for you. Come back and update us. Is there a link between gut health, MS, and thyroid disease? Yes. MS is an autoimmune disease. Thyroid is oftentimes autoimmune. Hashimoto's, which is a form of hypothyroid autoimmunity. And gut health. One of the precursors, or one of the potential precursors for autoimmune development, is leaky gut. So gut health has a major role to play in the development of diseases like MS and thyroid disease. So there's definitely a link. Is tuna in the can bad with high mercury? Depends on the brand. Some brands are higher mercury than others. Some brands go further in their testing and limit the mercury quantity more than others. I don't know about anybody losing their leg because of high tuna intake. I think that's probably an overstatement or an overstretch. Somebody's overactive imagination, maybe. Losing a leg over high tuna. You'd have to eat a mountain of mercury, and even then you might not lose your leg. You might more specifically develop other neurological problems, but losing an entire leg, I highly doubt that was associated with tuna. Are there any other reasons that might cause high PSA levels other than cancer? So you're specifically talking about PSA, prostate-specific antigen. I'm assuming that, Mary. So if I'm assuming wrong, you can let me know. But sugar, dairy, gluten. I've seen high PSA levels dramatically drop with diet change. So you should also know that any oncologist any GP, any prostate expert who's worth their weight knows that using a PSA as a cancer screening tool is a terrible, terrible, inaccurate way to go about testing. PSAs are very misleading and very inaccurate. So unless there's a confirmatory cancer diagnosis, PSA should not be the tool that your doctor is using to assess whether or not you could be developing prostate cancer. I've seen doctors miss and abuse PSA levels to the tune of scaring men so badly that they have their prostates removed, and then that ruins their sex life and it ruins their manhood. And I've seen that happen in men as young as in their 40s because of the fear of that PSA test. But PSA has, in much of the research, is basically disvalidated using PSA as a screening tool by itself, right? So never judge whether or not somebody has prostate cancer or needs prostate removal as a result of a PSA level. It's a mistake. Yeah. So, the endless questions about, you get one video that says an ounce of chocolate a day is bad because of the lead and the cadmium, then another video that says 3 times a day of chocolate helps with stem cells. Nobody knows what's true. If they're being honest, nobody knows. Because the chocolate containing lead and cadmium, first of all, those tests that recently confirmed that have not been repeated. And anytime we have a problem in science, science is not, hey, this test found that, therefore it's true everywhere all the time. Science is, okay, we found this to be true. Can we repeat the same experiment and get the same result? Is that true again? Is that true again? And so science is the process of eliminating different potential possibilities or half-truths or mistruths or myths. And so I think this whole thing that's been going on around the world of chocolate, I don't think we have enough science that's been done yet to validate whether or not we know 1 ounce versus eating it to help stem cells. I think the jury is out on that verdict. I would say, is there the potential that chocolate contains too much lead and cadmium? Yes. Does that mean you should never eat it? Probably not. If we tested 25 other foods tomorrow and found lead in them, let's say we tested broccoli, let's say we tested Brussels sprouts and we tested, apples, and we found lead and cadmium in those products. Would we then all of a sudden quit eating them? And let's say we tested the next 10 foods, would we quit eating them? I think at the end of the day, you have to understand that the way that farming is done conventionally, a lot of pesticides contain heavy metals. It was only a matter of time before these metals started to show up in the foods that we were eating as we were contaminating our own soil. So I think the best thing that you can do is buy and eat organically or raise as much of your own food as you can to avoid as much of the toxic swill that we're being exposed to. Because at the end of the day, most of the chocolates that are out there, I've reviewed some, and the ones I've reviewed and kind of approved more were organic. And I think that's the best that we have that we can do at this point, is just making sure you're minimizing your exposure to chemicals by choosing things that don't have directly chemicals added to them. I read a new study from Europe that says erythritol can cause bloody clots and stroke and heart attack in those with coronary issues. Is that only erythritol for corn or fruits as well? I'd say I'd have to read that study. I don't think any one study can definitively say that. And the other thing I would say about anytime a research study comes out talking about a natural vitamin, mineral, or food substance causing disease, you have to initially, especially if it's the only study of its kind, you have to take that with some degree of a grain of salt. And the reason why is there's very much an attack on nutrition. There's very much an attack on natural medicine. I mean, we saw that better in these last 3 years than we've ever seen it. I mean, it was a massive attack. If you guys remember, I was attacked. I was investigated by several agencies for no reason, and I was attacked by major publications like New York Post and Business Insider for no other reason than saying take your vitamin D. And anytime we have a study that tries to put blame on something like a stroke or a heart attack on the fact that somebody's using erythritol, yet the entire industry is quiet on the fact that sugar is a known agent that causes these things. I think we have to ask whether that study is actually somebody paid for a study to doom a natural agent, or whether that's actual research that needs to be repeated and revalidated. Again, I would say I wouldn't jump into that and trust that study too terribly much. I mean, I'd have to read it first and foremost, but that would just be my thought. Best way to identify complex food intolerances is to use lymphocyte response, Vlad. I think we put a link up earlier. If we didn't, we can put it up now. But lymphocyte response is what you want to use to measure complex, difficult to understand, or difficult to identify food intolerances. What's my opinion on taking the drug Ozempic to reduce fatty liver? I think taking any drug to reduce fatty liver is the wrong move. I think drugs don't solve disease. I mean, there are very few medicines that solve disease, and one of them being if you have an overt infection that needs an antibiotic. Okay, by all means, get with your doctor. But drugs that treat chronic inflammatory problems that are caused by diet and lifestyle choices are bad ideas. They don't work. Again, historically, go back and watch the last 3 episodes. I spelled that out, I think, very clearly in those. Mary Ellen says, just moved into a new home that has a RO water system besides ultra electrolytes. Do you recommend anything else? No, I think you're solid if you're putting ultra electrolytes into that RO water. I think you're okay. Which vitamins assist with nerve pain due to spinal interruption from a spinal cord injury? Ooh, that's a tough one, Mary. Supporting the nerves naturally, alpha-lipoic acid for sure, 800 to 1,000 milligrams a day. Vitamin B1 would be a good option, thiamine, possibly B12. Really, honestly, Mary Ellen, I mean, I could give you things that we know can support nerve healing, but ultimately you really should get tested because the generic answers could be right and accurate and helpful for you, but if you're really struggling to a point where, from a spinal cord injury where the doctor's going to put you on Cymbalta or wanting to, getting tested is going to be probably far more effective for you than just kind of trying to guess at what might be beneficial. Restless leg syndrome, what can I do? I've seen a lot of people with restless leg have calcium and folate deficiencies, also have microbiome deficiencies, so a good probiotic might be beneficial or helpful. Cut out caffeine and cut out any kind of stimulants. If you're on any kind of prescription drugs that are stimulants, get with your doctor and kind of revisit whether or not you need those, because at the end of the day, overstimulating the nervous system is a major contributing factor to restless leg. Do you support breast cancer screening or think it adds to the risk? I think it adds to the stress load of the human. Look, I think the best way to do breast cancer screening is for women to do self-examination. Women know their bodies more than any doctor. And that's not to say that some women can't find breast cancer, but there's a really good book called Overdiagnosed. I want to say the author's name is a researcher. I think his name is Werbach, I believe, if my memory's right on that. But the book is called Overdiagnosed, and it's about breast cancer and doing screening. And if you're questioning whether or not you should get breast cancer screening, read that book, because it will enlighten you about the myths and misconceptions about the accuracy of screening. A lot of women get kind of pseudo-accurate results where it's positive, but it's not fully positive, and they're not sure if maybe it's negative, and so then they want to do more biopsies, and in the process of waiting 6 months to get back in, this woman is losing her mind with stress because she thinks she may have cancer. When you've been a victim of something like that, I think the answer is obvious. The screening is bad news. but everybody's got to make the decision they're the most comfortable with. But I think the best way you're going to make an informed decision, because that's a pretty complex topic, is read that book. It'll give you a much better idea of how to approach whether or not you want to make that decision. I can tell you what I would do, and I can tell you, I can't tell you what my wife would do. I think I know her heart, and I think I know her mind well enough, though, to say that I know for sure she wouldn't do breast cancer screening. And if I were a woman, I wouldn't either. But that's my decision, and that's her decision. But you guys might have a different opinion. Maybe your experiences lead you down a different road. But to me, the screening, I'd say it like this: if you believe in conventional cancer treatment, then do conventional screening methodology. If you don't believe in conventional cancer treatment, then don't. Because the whole premise of running a test is to help to discern, what you should do. And if the test is going to lead you down a road that you're not confident in, will help you, whether that road is the natural road or whether that road is the conventional road. It's the wrong one if your belief doesn't match it. Let's see. Scroll up just a little on the left. Oh, there we go. "73-year-old male, upper extremity tremor since December with increased frequency and involvement of other limb and also instability following MRI indicating chronic microvascular ischemia." Boy, this is a hell of a question, Brenda. Diet nearly all processed food and very high in gluten at every meal. Thoughts regarding? Yeah, change the diet. It doesn't matter what the diagnosis is. We're talking about microvessel ischemia, or absence of oxygen in blood. And that is going to deteriorate anybody's nervous system. So the diagnosis is less important than the change that will improve the blood flow and the oxygenation to the tissue. So, but at 73 old, being a male, are they willing to change their diet? That's really where the conundrum comes in for a lot of folks. You can tell them or know that if they did change their diet, they'd get better, but a lot of times they won't change their diet. It's just not what they want to do. It's not their philosophy, and food is their friend and enemy. It's their frenemy in a sense. If calcium level in blood test is normal range, would it hurt to take it if having heart palpitations? No, probably not, but it may also not solve heart palpitations. Not all heart palpitations are caused by calcium deficit. Is mercury amalgam, does mercury amalgam aggravate gluten sensitivity? I would say that mercury amalgam does its own aggravation to your nervous system because it's mercury, and mercury is a neurotoxin, but I wouldn't say that mercury necessarily makes gluten worse or makes a gluten reaction worse. Let's see here. Do you recommend, saw that one, I think I answered that one. Oh, do you recommend electrolyte drink mix? I have been reading and saw it is best than just drinking plain water. It depends on how you filter your water, Alexandra. If you're using an RO filter, yes, I do recommend electrolytes. If you're a heavy exerciser and you're sweating aggressively, yeah, adding some electrolytes is not a bad idea. One of the best electrolytes to add is just adding like a nice Himalayan pink salt to your food. There's minerals in that as well. And a lot of people have stopped salting their food for fear of high blood pressure, which is just more bad advice in the history of bad advice in medicine. What's the bottom of my shirt say? It says, what does it say? I can't read my own shirt. I think it says, thankful that rum and tequila are gluten-free. Because if you are going to drink, you have to make sure you're not drinking gluten-laden alcohol. So would it be possible to put the book you recommended in the chat? It's overdiagnosed. Go look it up. If you have tested positive for ragweed, is it okay to use stevia? Some people don't do well with stevia that also have ragweed allergies, so I would say it's up to the individual and how they do or don't react to it. if you're saying I have absolutely no outward or inward reaction that I'm aware of, especially considering the new erythritol stuff, yeah, I'm not opposed to stevia, even if you have a ragweed allergy, unless of course you're reactive to it. Best thing to do is to get tested to see. I mean, if you're really on the fence and you don't know, the best thing really to do would be to measure, whether or not you're reactive to stevia directly. If you're in doubt. Yeah, comment there. All of my doctors are dictators or of no use. Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate in today's world, but doctors don't have the time. I don't want to make a blanket statement about every single doctor because there's some great doctors out there, but a lot of doctors are just as frustrated as the patients. They're frustrated because they're locked in a system where they're, $250,000 in debt from medical school, and they have a family to feed, and they bought into this whole thing of helping people, but when they got into the residency, they realized this really isn't what I thought it was going to be. But now they're invested, and then they realize that they have to see 50 patients a day and give each one of them about 5 minutes of time, and not have any really great ability to impact anyone's health other than to write a prescription to mask or chemically manipulate their symptoms into submission. And they're just as disgruntled. Many of them are just as disgruntled as you guys are. I know that because I have a lot of really good doctor friends, and I think it was last year, it was close to 120,000 docs in the U.S. Quit, walked away. COVID was I would say it was the tipping point. A lot of really great doctors are leaving medicine because they can't handle the loss of autonomy and they can't handle the medical board attacks on their ability to make good decisions with their patients. And so they're walking away. And so unfortunately, I think what that means is we're being left with a lot of doctors who frankly just don't give a shit. Excuse my language, but it's true. A lot of them don't care. They're in it for the wrong reasons. They lack empathy. They lack cognitive power to understand how the body heals. And if you have a philosophy that varies at all any differently, they treat you like you're a moron and want to refer you to psych, or they want to fire you as a patient. And that, those kinds of people don't belong in medicine. But unfortunately, because corporations are buying out medicine, those are the kind of people that we're seeing be left over. And so, this leads it up to you guys. You guys have to make a decision about what it is that you want to do, what kind of doctor you want to see, what kind of health care you want to participate in. Because what we have now is not health care. What we have now is symptom management, and at great cost, not just financially, but the burden of long-term drug use is not free. There is a cost to that. Would you say that Lyme disease could be helped through gluten and grain reduction? Absolutely. A lot of people that I've seen with Lyme, they come to me after being treated for years. Some doctors treat Lyme with mass doses of antibiotics for long periods of time. And these patients that have come to me, in my experience, they come and they're not better. And when we take them gluten or grain-free, they no longer have the symptoms of Lyme. In other words, maybe they were misdiagnosed. Maybe they didn't really actually have Lyme. Maybe they had gluten-induced neurological arthritis that mimicked Lyme or that caused false positives on their Lyme testing, which can happen. Gluten can cause false positive Lyme tests. It's just my experience that anybody who's got a Lyme diagnosis should change their diet before embarking on, long periods of antibiotic use, because if diet change resolves the issue, then the antibiotic may not be necessary. And so that's just my take on what I have seen with Lyme. Love that. Rebel says, just got your protein powder. It's the best I've used. Can you drink it twice a day? Yeah, you can. But I would encourage you to make sure you're getting real food in there too, right? Protein powders are great for that extra protein, but real food's great too. Can you speak on metabolic impairment, adrenal fatigue, and hormone imbalance? No gluten, no dairy for years. Any help for these conditions? That's a huge question. I could speak on it for hours. I would simply say, if you're gluten and dairy free, are you grain free would be one caveat. And then a couple of other points. If you're still struggling and you've changed your diet, are you sugar free? And have you been tested for nutritional deficit? You know, the adrenal glands can't function and stay strong and recover if your vitamin C is low or your vitamin B5 is low. And this is where a lot of doctors fail to help patients find answers, is they fail to measure the nutrition status of their patients. I mean, nutrition is how you heal and repair. And if you don't know what your status is, it's probably because it was never measured. And that's something that, again, if you've already changed your diet and still struggled, that is really a very important step in the process of recovery. I need to eat gluten-free, low oxalate diet. Can I use your protein powder? Yes. ENT said I have myoclonus, palatal myoclonus. They're talking about Botox. I'd get a second opinion. If you have myoclonus, there's a reason. Something's triggering it. Something's causing it. And it's not a deficiency of Botox. What can I do to lower cholesterol? Ask the question whether or not lowering your cholesterol is the right thing to do. Go back, Carolyn, and watch my video called The Cholesterol Myth. Does a gluten DNA test come with more than a yes or no response? No. It tells you whether or not you have the genetic predisposition to react to gluten, and that's what you need to know, because that's the only thing it measures. So if you have it, you avoid it, and if you don't have it, you don't need to avoid it. Let's see here. Do you have a video with steps on how to start a gluten-free diet? I do. I actually have a master class. For those of you who haven't taken it, it's very comprehensive. And yes, there's actually a couple of different videos. It's a 10 video series, and that specifically are helping you navigate and beginning kind of the easy beginning steps of going gluten-free. And you can check that out. It's glutenology.net/registration. It's free. You go to that page and you can register for free. You can watch it for free. It's there as a public resource to humanity as part of our ongoing mission to help save 100 million lives. So check that course out, and you'll get a lot of great information from it. The other thing I would encourage you to do, if you haven't already, is come visit us at glutenfreesociety.org. And we have, to date, thousands of articles and videos and tutorials and comprehensive e-guides on navigating the gluten-free diet. And if you sign up for our newsletter there, we'll send you a lot of that information absolutely free. Again, if you want to buy supplements from Gluten Free Society, you can do that. If you want to purchase testing, you can do that. But the information is always free. That part I take very seriously. I believe that people with knowledge can empower themselves to make better decisions and ultimately, hopefully, fire their doctors, because the system has absolutely failed us all. And look, I come from a medical family, so this is no offense to any of you that are doctors. This is no offense to any of you that are trying to do it right but frustrated. This is just truth as I see it. Okay, how are high triglycerides bad? How can I lower them? Yeah, high triglycerides are very bad. And the best way, the number one way to lower high triglycerides is not a low-fat diet, it's a low-carb diet. Triglycerides are generally made as a result of high carbohydrates. Your body converts excessive carbs into triglycerides, and then your liver stores that around itself, and then your liver becomes fatty. That's kind of the process of how that works. So the best way, simply put, the best generic way to start lowering triglycerides is to change your diet and reduce your carbohydrate intake, especially processed carbs and processed sugars. Okay, I think I'm over time here, but I love some of these comments. So thanks you guys for all your kind words. Let's see. I think we're good. We'll see you guys Tuesday. If you got more questions that I didn't get to, come back and visit me on Tuesday, 12:30 Central Standard Time. We'll be doing another Q&A. I said Tuesday. I should have said Thursday. Yeah. Today's Tuesday. I'm sorry. I've been at a wedding, so my mind is a little frazzled. But Thursday, 12:30 Central Standard Time, we'll be back for a live Q&A. So if you got more questions, you want to come back, you can do that this Thursday and all Thursdays as we move into the future. So again, we're here live every Tuesday at 6 and every Thursday at 12:30 p.m. That's Central Standard Time, Texas time, if you will. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. We'll see you next week. Or actually, we'll see you on Thursday. Have a great evening. Take care.